You may not realize it, but there's a specific moment in life something awakens within you with such silent force that it becomes It's as if an invisible presence begins to push your thoughts in directions you've avoided for years. An intimate feeling that something is about to change, even if you don't know what it is. Carl Jung said that this impulse is not random. It's the self, the deepest core of the psyche, trying to break through the surface. He stated that when the soul decides to speak, it doesn't ask if you're ready. Simply manifests it. And this manifestation can arise as restlessness, dissatisfaction, intense curiosity, or even an emotional discomfort seemingly without reason. The truth is that almost no one recognizes the call in time, as it presents itself with the strangeness of a dream that insists on continuing when you wake up. Jung believed that most people live detached from their true nature, accumulating masks and routines that serve only to maintain a sense of control. But what you call control, he would call psychological imprisonment. There is a brutal difference between living and merely occupying space and time. And it is at this point that the hidden code doesn't appear as a clear revelation, nor as a ready-made answer. It emerges as a fracture, an internal rupture that forces you to realize that something no longer fits. When Jung said that the soul creates symptoms to attract attention, he was explaining exactly that which you try to ignore transforms into that which demands transformation. Perhaps you've already felt this tension. A life that functions on the outside, pulses empty on the inside. A deep desire to go beyond, even without knowing what lies. A feeling that the world is pointing you towards something, but the pieces don't yet connect. It's common to think this is just anxiety, tiredness, or confusion, but Jung asserted that these sensations are psychic signals, not random noise. They are the harbinger, internal shift, the beginning of the process in which you stop repeating the past and begin to connect with who you truly are. And this movement is always unsettling because the self doesn't emerge to comfort, it emerges to live. And all liberation requires rupture. You can try to rationalize this, try to stifle it, and try to convince yourself that everything is all. Something inside you knows it isn't. Psyche is too wise to deceive itself for long. When Jung studied the symbols that emerge from the unconscious, he concluded that none of them appear by chance. Everything that arises with a purpose. And if you feel this calling now, because your life has reached the limit of vision, the self is trying to lead you to a broader, more conscious, more powerful state. But before this movement happens, it's natural for doubts to arise. What is changing? What does this mean? Why now? Where does this lead me? These are legitimate questions, and Jung said they shouldn't be avoided, because the right question opens doors that the wrong answer closes. The truth is, there comes a point where discomfort ceases to be a nuisance and transforms into a calling. You're not just restless, you're being called. Perhaps it's not clear yet, but there's a force trying to reorganize your destiny from within, as if a profound intelligence were removing old layers of perception. You may even believe that it is you who is changing, but according to Jung, it is the self that is finally taking the reins that the ego has tried to control for too long. And when the self emerges, it always brings something that seems bigger than you, bigger than fears, bigger than your limits, bigger than your expectations. This is precisely where Jung's presence becomes fundamental. He said that the soul doesn't awaken, it awakens to make it. It is in this process that the hidden code of inner prosperity begins to form, not as a technique, but as an alignment, not as an external secret, but as an internal reminder, not as a ready-made path, but as an inevitable calling. And if you feel something stirring within you now, that's the psyche responding to the movement of existence. Jung believed that every person at some point receives this invitation to become more conscious. Some accept, others flee, and it is this choice that determines everything else. Perhaps you're noticing at this very moment small sparks of recognition, the feeling that this message didn't reach you by chance. Jung said that life doesn't miss addresses, that what needs to touch your consciousness always finds a way. This is resonating within you now, a sign that your process doesn't matter your age, history, or your current circumstances. The self doesn't awaken early or late, it awakens when it should. The question is, will you listen or will you ignore it? Will you allow something greater to manifest, or will you hide behind the old narratives you've learned to repeat? This is the first step of the code, a silent yet transformative step. Your soul is calling you to enter new territory, and despite the fear, there's a part of you that knows exactly that this is a part that has waited too long, that has postponed too long, that has convinced itself otherwise enough times. The question now is simple, direct, and inevitable. Are you willing to follow the call? If this introduction sparked something in you, leave a comment below. I feel the calling. Like this video and subscribe to follow the next part. Jung would say that the journey never continues for those who refuse to take the first. There's a moment in life when everything seems to be going normal. Inside, something begins. It's not a grand event, nor an impossible sign to ignore. Most of the time, the rupture arrives disguised as routine. A day when you wake up and feel you no longer belong. A banal conversation that for some reason keeps echoing in your mind. An unexpected feeling of emptiness in the face of something that previously seemed efficient. Jung said that the psyche never initiates a transformation with noise, but with friction. First it pushes lightly, then it presses, and only then, when you insist on not listening, does it break. Imagine someone who has always worked tirelessly, believing that stability was the only possible path. Every day, the same commute, the thoughts, the same fears, the same justifications repeated like a mantra that prevent any change. Suddenly, this person notices that something no longer fits. The work seems heavier than before. The automatic smile no longer comes naturally. Energy depletes faster. Life begins to show small flaws that previously went unnoticed. Immediately, a question arises. Why do I feel like I'm living the wrong life? It's a simple question, but profoundly deep. Jung said that when this question appears, the unconscious is already reconfiguring everything. The rupture doesn't come to destroy. Comes to reorganize. Like a crack in the wall that at first glance seems like just a flaw, but in reality reveals that the entire structure needs to be reviewed. Small annoyances become warnings. Coincidences begin to repeat themselves. Mention things that seem strangely directed at you. Jung called this compensatory material. The psyche trying to balance what is misaligned, sending increasingly stronger signals until you recognize that something needs change. And however uncomfortable it may seem, this discomfort is a form of healing. Life doesn't pressure you where it pressures you where you're praying yourself. Perhaps you've experienced something like this recently. A feeling that you've lost enthusiasm once gave you an unexpected breakup that seemed unfair, but which now, looking back more calmly, seems to have freed you from something that was suffocating you. A failure that hurt deeply, but which exposed truths you wouldn't have the courage to admit on your own. Jung said that every loss contains a message, and every pain contains all. Nothing comes to an end without something inside you being ready to be born. There are also situations that seem like mere coincidences, but which, seen through Jung clues, you think about changing jobs, and, on the same day, receive an unexpected offer. You begin to question the direction of your life and find a phrase that answers exactly what you hear. You dream of something strange, and days later, experience a situation that carries exactly the same symbol. What seems like chance to the conscious mind is, for the unconscious, pure language. It expresses itself through images, impulses, repetitions, improbable encounters, and even events that you believe to be problems, but which are actually doors. The rupture, then, is not a mistake of life. It is a movement of expansion. But the ego, that small, fragile part that insists on keeping everything as it is, fears any change. It prefers the security of repetition to the uncertainty of growth. And it is in this silent conflict that most people get stuck. The mind says stay, the soul says go. The mind says wait, the soul says now is the time. The mind says you can't, the soul says you always could. Jung taught that the ego fights to survive, but the self fights to manifest itself. And when these two clash, you feel the weight of this tension in every choice, every gesture, every breath. In moments like these, everything around you seems to take on a different meaning. Ordinary conversations take on symbolic weight, small decisions zig, and even silence becomes laden with messages you can't explain. But some ignore this shift and return to familiar comfort. But some, even with fear, continue walking toward known. It is this step, taken without any guarantee of outcome, marks the beginning of transformation. Jung said that the individual's path is not trodden by those who know where they are going, but by those who accept to continue, even without seeing the destination. Life truly begins to change when you realize that the rupture wasn't happening to you, or you. It's at this moment that a powerful realization emerged. Nothing that fell apart was solid enough to support who you are becoming. Nothing that left your life was aligned with your growth. Nothing that hurt was useless. Everything had purpose. And when this understanding sets in, there also arises the mysterious feeling that somehow you're being guided by something greater, something that cannot be explained, only recognized. Jung would call this the natural movement of the psyche towards wholeness. And perhaps you're feeling exactly that right now. A mixture of fear, excitement, doubt, and intuition. A sense that something is happening behind the scenes of your life. As if internal and external forces are rearranging themselves to push you toward a new chapter. This feeling is not an illusion. It is the beginning of expanding consciousness. If this part spoke directly to you, write in the comments, I acknowledge the rupture, like this video and subscribe. Jung would say that denying the call is refusing one's own evolution, and the journey continues in the next part. underscore at some point in you discover that it's not the world that prevents you from thriving, but rather a part of yourself that you never fully understood. Carl Jung called this part the shadow, and said that it contains exactly what you face. The shadow is the collection of repressed impulses, beliefs, pains, traumas, and potentials that you deemed unacceptable, inadequate, or too dangerous to show the world. And it's surprising to realize that it's not your flaws that block you the most, but your unacknowledged gifts. The shadow holds not only what you rejected, everything you could be, and didn't allow yourself. Jung asserted that psychological gold is always hidden in the dark, never on the comfortable surface of your. When you try to thrive without integrating your shadow, your life becomes a silent conflict. You move forward, but something pulls you. Desire change, but sabotage your own decisions. You plan for the future, but behave like someone stuck in the past. It's like driving with one foot on the accelerator and the other on the brake. And no matter how much effort you put in, your destiny remains stuck at the starting point. The shadow operates as a second script, invisible yet active, shaping your limits, your choices, outcomes. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you call it fate. That's exactly what happens when your inner wealth remains imprisoned by beliefs you've never questioned. It is inevitable, then, to ask, what lies in your shadow that has so much power over you? What are you afraid to discover within yourself? What has your own mind been trying to hide for so long? The truth is that the shadow doesn't reveal itself through signs. It appears in the details, in the discomfort you feel when taking on greater responsibilities, in the inexplicable guilt when imagining a better life, and the constant feeling that you don't deserve what you deserve. It always emerges when you try to be greater than your history has allowed. That's why many people retreat before it's not for lack of ability, but for lack of internal permission. Jung said that a person's limit is never in what they can do, but in what they believe they have the right to become. And this thought is more liberating than it seems, as it shows that the obstacle is not external, it's a reflection. When you look at repetitive situations in your life, you realize they follow a pattern. Relationships that end, projects that stall at the same, opportunities that arise but evaporate when you try to get close. There's always a point of repetition, a point where everything returns to its previous state. This isn't bad luck or coincidence. It's the shadow working to keep it intact. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to protect you from what it believes to be dangerous. The problem is that it has learned to interpret any change as a threat. Prosperity requires expansion, and expansion requires an identity that isn't afraid to grow. And here's something few people realize. The shadow isn't static. It transforms as you approach it. At first it seems like just a weight. Then it becomes a mirror. And when you finally decide to face it, it transforms into a portal. Jung believed that each fragment of the shadow contains repressed psychic energy, waiting to be reached. That's why people who confront their shadows seem to awaken unexpected talents, courage they didn't know they possessed, clarity they never accessed before. What was once fear transforms into drive. What was once blockage transforms into strength. What once seemed like chaos transforms into direction. But this raises another essential question. If the shadow holds so much power, are we so afraid? What image of our acting with so? What are we still trying to hide, even from ourselves? Jung said that the shadow is formed when, in childhood, we discover which parts of ourselves were accepted and which parts were repressed. You learned to be good, adequate, acceptable, but you silenced your boldness, spontaneity, ambition, your desire to achieve more than you were told was possible. And now, in adulthood, you try to thrive using only half of your psyche. There's no way to expand when you remain divided. True wealth is born when you bring together all that is light and darkness and allow your soul to direct life without fear of the parts you avoid. Jung asserted that wholeness is not built solely on virtues, but on the reintegration of what was separated. The shadow begins to dissolve when you realize it's not an enemy, but a message. It points to everything you need to reclaim to become whole. Your denied strength, stifled intuition, your forgotten worth, your ability to confidently present yourself to the world. That's why, paradoxically, the more you try to hide your shadow, the more it controls your steps. And the more you embrace it, the less power it loses over you. Prosperity, whether emotional, spiritual, or material only, fully manifests when you become a unified being. And now, an essential revelation emerges. The shadow is not dispelled by effort, but by awareness. It doesn't need to be fought, but illuminated. It doesn't need force, but understanding. And when that understanding arrives, something extraordinary happens. Old patterns begin to cycles end, and what once seemed impossible becomes attainable. Not because the world has changed, but because you have changed. Jung said that external life reorganizes itself when internal life aligns. And this is one of the most profound truths that psychology has ever. So, look at your life honestly. Where do you repeat patterns? Where do you feel fear? Where do you hide from yourself? What is your shadow trying to show you that you're not yet ready to accept? If this section opened up new insights for you, write in the comments, "I illuminate my shadow." Like the video and subscribe. Jung would say that the journey intensifies precisely when you decide to continue. Underscore, there is a decisive moment in the inner journey when everything that seemed disconnected begins to acquire an unexpected meaning. Coincidences that previously went unnoticed begin to repeat themselves with an almost disconcerting precision, as if life had initiated a silent dialogue with you. Carl Jung called this synchronicity and described it as external events that respond directly to the inner state of the psyche. They are not simple coincidences, they are mirrors. For those who have experienced this, the sensation is unmistakable. It is as if the world were trying to get closer to your consciousness. And when that happens, it is impossible to ignore. There are striking accounts in Jung's clinical diary. One involves an extremely rational patient, incapable of accepting any idea and supported by logic. He lived trapped within such a rigid mental framework that no therapeutic intervention seemed to act. But then, in the middle of a session, she began to narrate a dream in which she received a rare golden scarab. While she was describing the object, a real insect hit the office window. Jung opened the window, picked up the insect, gave it to the patient. It was a scarab, almost identical to the one in the dream, something rare to find in the region climate. This event, improbable by nature, broke through her intellectual defenses and marked the beginning of her healing. It wasn't the scarab itself, but the symbolic shock that opened her consciousness to the possibility that life is deeper than it seems. Similar situations, though less dramatic, happen every day. You think of someone you haven't seen in years. That person calls minutes later. You consider changing jobs, and on the same day, a new opportunity arises. You feel you're on the wrong path, and suddenly you receive a sign so clear it seems impossible not to. For Jung, this wasn't magic or superstition. It was how the unconscious communicated, and the individual was listened. The greater the inner alignment, the more frequent these events become. It's as if the external world follows the internal reorganization of your psyche. But this reorganization doesn't happen without. It occurs when the self, the central instance of the soul, begins to take command. This process is not smooth. It is often accompanied by improbable events that challenge common logic. People report decisions made on impulse that inexplicably turn out to be correct. Others say they found opportunities at the exact moment they stopped insisting on what no longer made sense. Some change course out of simple curiosity and see their lives change completely. These seem like disconnected stories, but they all have something in common: the breakdown of rational order so that symbolic order can emerge. One interesting fact is that Jung believed the unconscious has access to information that the conscious mind has not yet grasped. He said that the psyche moves in deep layers, where time and space don't function as we think. That's why some people have intuitions that prove true, premonitions that are confirmed, sensations that steer them away from danger or bring them closer to opportunities. When you experience this, you realize that there is an intelligence within you that sees beyond what your eyes can reach. And this intelligence manifests itself not only in major events, but also in small details that seem insignificant. There are even more surprising events. A woman who, after years of trying unsuccessfully to get pregnant, gave up and decided to travel. During this trip, she met someone who told her about an unknown alternative method. 2 weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant, something doctors considered improbable. A man who had always been afraid to abandon his corporate career received, in a single day, 3 job offers in the very creative field he dreamed of exploring but never dared to. Another who dreamed of starting a business found, by chance, a book left behind in a coffee shop containing the exact answer to the problem that was preventing him from moving forward. These are events too improbable to be dismissed, but too subtle to be understood by common logic. Jung said that when the unconscious wants to transform a life, it creates bridges. These bridges appear as synchronicities, seemingly random encounters that carry meaning. Small coincidences that multiply, unexpected changes that seem to push you towards a new path. He believed that every individual possesses an invisible thread that connects them to their purpose, and that this thread manifests itself through symbols and signs. The more you ignore them, the more insistent they become. The more you listen, the clearer they become. It's curious to note that many people only perceive these signs after something significant happens. They say, "I already felt this was going to happen, something told me to do this, I had a premonition," and most ignore them, thinking they're just. But Jung taught that there is no randomness in the psyche. Everything has an origin, everything has an intention, everything has meaning. When you begin to perceive this invisible logic, you discover that your life has always been trying to communicate with you. You just didn't have the tools to interpret it. And here comes an unexpected twist. Synchronicity, doesn't depend on belief. It happens even when you don't believe. What changes isn't the phenomenon itself, but your ability to recognize. When you awaken to this perception, the relationship with life changes completely. The world ceases to seem like a chaotic place and begins to resemble a field of symbolic messages. Each situation, each person, each event becomes a piece of something bigger, and you begin to walk not just with steps, awareness. It is this type of psychic movement that marks the beginning of a new chapter. When life begins to respond to your inner state, you realize you are not walking alone. There is a hidden order, a symbolic intelligence, a kind of silent direction that guides your path when you come into alignment with yourself. And at that moment, the impossible begins to lose its power, while the unexpected begins to take shape. This is how transformation announces it. And for Jung, this is how destiny reveals itself. There's a point in the journey where life seems to push you toward an invisible crossroads. Not a common choice, nor something you immediately perceive. It's a kind of silent yet constant pressure that forces you to confront who you were, who you are, who you need to become. Carl Jung said that the greatest human conflict occurs when the old identity no longer serves, but the new one has not yet been born. It's a kind of internal journey where nothing is familiar, and each step seems to demand a courage you don't know if you possess. At this stage, everything that was once solid crumbles. It's like walking down a narrow corridor holding on to objects that are no longer useful, which you insist on keeping for fear of the emptiness that will arise. This transition provokes a profound sense of estrangement. Suddenly, thoughts that were once just distant ideas begin to gain emotional force. Dreams that seemed impossible start to seem necessary. And what you tolerated without question begins to bother you, as if an inner voice had changed its tone. This is how transformation begins, not with thunder, but with a discomfort that intensifies slowly, until it becomes impossible to ignore. Jung stated that the psyche only changes when the tension between the old and the new becomes unbearable. This is the critical point where many advance and many retreat. The old identity tries to pull you back. It manifests in thoughts that whisper, "Don't do it, it's too risky, what if it goes wrong?" This is the voice of the ego trying to preserve its structure, because it feels threatened by any possibility of expansion. But there is another force within you, a deeper force that doesn't speak in words, but through feeling, a restlessness that doesn't disappear, a kind of silent certainty that grows in the center of your chest, even when logic tries to stifle it. Jung said that this impulse doesn't come from the conscious self, but from the self, the part of the psyche that knows your way, even when you don't yet see it. It's common for life to present situations that seem like tests during this process. People drift away for no apparent reason. Old opportunities run out. Routines wear out. Sometimes, something you believe to be permanent breaks down unexpectedly. It's in these moments that emotional tension intensifies, because it seems like everything is crumbling at once. But Jung taught that what breaks during a transformation is not being destroyed, but removed from the path. The psyche eliminates what hinders its growth. And this movement may seem cruel, but it is profoundly necessary. In some situations, conflict becomes so strong that you feel as if you are living two lives at the same time. The life you try to maintain because it is safe, and the life you try to be born because it is true. This internal clash creates a feeling of instability, as if neither direction is completely solid. You try to cling to the known, but the known no longer serves you. You try to move towards the unknown, but the unknown is still shrouded in mist. This is the tension that accelerates the individuation process, a path that Jung believed to be the purpose of every human. Becoming who you truly are requires the courage to abandon what you only learned to be. And then, as in every great psychological journey, a turning point occurs, a moment when something inside you finally gives way. It's not a rational decision, nor an act of conscious bravery. It's more like an exhaustion of distance. You realize you can no longer remain small just if you can't keep repeating patterns you already know imprison you. You can't keep ignoring the deep feeling that there's a greater life waiting for you. It is at this moment that the old identity begins to crumble. And this crumbling is not destruction, but liberation. Jung said that no transformation happens while a person is still trying to save the old version of themselves. Change begins when you allow it to die. This process can be subtle or dramatic. Sometimes it's just a new thought that takes. Other times, it's an external event that pushes you out of your comfort zone. In all cases, something important shifts. The person you've always been begins to move away, while the person you could always be steps forward. The surprising thing is that this advance is not usually accompanied by absolute clarity, but by a sense of inevitability. At this point, you begin to perceive a fundamental difference. The new identity doesn't require you to achieve something before it exists. It only requires you to stop hiding, It's as if, throughout your life, you've built internal walls to protect yourself. But now, these walls have become prisons. Expansion demands that they crumble. When that begins to happen, unexpected feelings emerge. Boldness, heightened intuition, an energy that seemed dormant. This happens because, by abandoning the old identity, you release psychic energy that's trapped, sustaining narratives that and then something even more surprising emerges. External change begins to respond to internal change, magically but symbolically and consistently. Paths that were previously blocked begin to open. New people appear, bringing perspectives you had never considered. Situations that seemed definitive begin to dissolve. Life seems to gain momentum, not because something external changed first, but because you changed. Jung said that reality transforms when the individual transforms, because external life is always a reflection of internal life. This is the stage where many feel fear, because they are caught between two worlds, the one that is crumbled and the one that is yet to form. But it is also the most powerful stage, because every step taken now has creative force. Here, the new identity begins to solidify not as a choice, but as a natural consequence of inner awakening. You begin to realize that you are not losing who you were, but recovering who you've been. And when this realization finally settles in, everything around seems to fall in, as if the universe were just waiting for you to say yes to what was already destined to emerge. There comes a point in the journey when you realize that nothing you've experienced so far has wasted. Every rupture, every silence, every improbable coincidence, every fear you tried to deny, all of this has formed an inner map that is now beginning to make sense. Carl Jung always insisted that human beings don't walk by chance, they walk inward. And by walking inward, they learn to see what has always been hidden beneath layers of repetition, survival, and automatic patterns. It is at this point that you understand that wealth, purpose, and expansion were never external destinations, but internal states that awaited your consent to emerge. Throughout this process, have you felt that something bigger was silently moving around your life? Have you noticed how old structures began to crumble so that something new could be born? Have you noticed that certain people distance themselves, not by chance, but because the new stage doesn't accommodate old roles? Jung said that life reorganizes everything around us when the individual begins to reorganize themselves internally. It's a natural, yet profound movement that brings both liberation and estrangement. Suddenly, nothing is as it was before. For the first time, this doesn't frighten us, it only invites us. Now you find yourself here, facing what Jung considered the most vital choice of all: to continue living as someone who reacts to the world, or to live as someone who creates their own path. He believed that the awakened individual does not follow life, they lead it. And leading one's own life does not mean controlling everything, but aligning oneself with what it is. A movement that begins with a simple yet challenging step. Stop running away from one. Stop maintaining masks, roles, worn-out versions of who you thought you needed to be to please, survive, or adapt. When you allow your inner truth to guide your movement, something remarkable happens. Resistance diminishes. It's as if life, once so burdensome, finally adjusts to the shape of your being. Tensions don't disappear immediately, but they cease to be obstacles, some guidelines. Jung said that what once seemed like a problem reveals itself as a message when you look at it from the perspective of consciousness. Pain changes meaning. Doubt becomes a compass. Fear transforms into revelation. This is why so many people describe their life turning point as the moment they finally heard what always tried to silence. Now, perhaps for the first time, you can see the hidden code Jung spoke of, not as an abstract mystery, but as a clear pattern that has always been present in your history. This code is the symbolic articulation between your thoughts, your emotions, and the events that cross your path. It reveals itself when the individual stops living in fragments and begins to live in an integrated. When they stop denying their shadow and begin to recognize it as the greatest source of. When they stop asking the world for permission to exist and finally allow their soul to take place. But understanding this code isn't enough. You need to apply it. Practical application doesn't require complicated formulas, just profound sincerity. You apply the code every time you make a choice aligned with your inner, even when it scares you. You apply the code when you notice a pattern repeating itself and decide to act differently this time. You apply the code when you listen to the intuition you always dismissed in favor of logic that never got you anywhere. You apply the code when you acknowledge that you deserve more than you accept. You apply the code when you stop waiting for an external signal and become the signal yourself. Transformation is not an event, it's a practice. Each day, you will be invited to act as the version that is emerging within. At times, this will require firmness, others, silence, others, courage. And above all, it will require honesty with yourself. Jung said that the path of individuation is lonely not because there is a lack of people, but because only you can decide to be whole. No one can do it for you. No one can walk through the portal of your own soul on your own too. No one can face your shadow in your place. But at the same time, no one can stop you from doing it if you truly decide to. And this is where the journey becomes exciting, and you realize you're not just learning concepts, but recognizing yourself in each one of them. You realize that what you were seeking in the world was, from the beginning, trying to emerge from within you. You realize that the pieces of your story, even those that seemed incompatible, now form an invisible coherence. You realize that, throughout this process, you have changed and will continue to change. Change is not a final destination. It is a continuous state of presence. The end of this journey is not an endpoint. Life will not return to how it was, as you will not return to you were. And this should not cause fear, it should cause relief. For the first time, you can walk with awareness. You can perceive the signs and recognize the patterns. You can choose your own narrative. You can allow life and psyche to work together, as Jung always taught they should. You don't need to know the end, just take the next step with truth. If this journey resonated deeply with you, leave your feedback, even if anonymously, in the comments. Share how you felt, what awakened in you, what you realized. Like the video so this message reaches more people who are ready to awaken, just like you.